Good morning. Pray for me. This is probably going to be the toughest Sunday school lesson I'll ever have to teach in my life. Daniel chapter 11, please. And I remind you from last week when we went through Daniel chapter 10, the entire chapter, the importance of 11 and 12. And as a matter of fact, there are no really, the chapter headings defeat the purpose of understanding this prophecy. Because when it starts at 10, it continues on through the end of 12. And so you can get confused with chapter 11, verse 1. I'll show you that in a minute as to who's speaking, who's doing the speaking. But this is, remember, chapter 10, Gabriel is telling Daniel that he tried to get this through to him for 3 weeks, for 21 days, and the prince of Persia, who is an ultimately satanic being, satanic angelic being, hindered him, and he had to call for Michael, who is the chief archangel, to come and help defeat the prince of Persia, so that he could get this through to Daniel. So this is so vital and so important. And let me just start with verse 1 of chapter 11. Again, it says, also I, and you have to go back a verse or two to know who's talking. And it's the angel that's speaking to Daniel. I said last week it was Gabriel. I think it's Gabriel because he was the one that spoke in earlier chapters and was known as Gabriel. But let's just call him Gabriel for want of what we're doing. He says, I also, said Gabriel, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him. Gabriel as I stood to confirm and strengthen him, which he was just talking about Michael coming and confirming and strengthening him against the prince of Persia in the previous chapter. So now the angel flips it over to Daniel. This is not Daniel speaking. And a lot of people, some people have even approached me in the last few weeks and said, well, Darius doesn't fit here with Daniel because Darius kind of came right before Cyrus, and Cyrus was in chapter 10, verse 1, and Daniel saw it in the third year of Cyrus. Remember what happened in the first year of Cyrus, back in Ezra chapter 1. In the first year, Cyrus signed a decree that said Israel could go back. Now, the first year of Cyrus was also the third year, or the third year of Cyrus first year of Cyrus was also the third year of Darius. So you're going back 3 years with just one verse. He's saying back 3 years ago, before Cyrus signed the decree for Israel to go back and rebuild the temple and rebuild the wall, we had this spiritual battle, this warfare in the spirit with a demonic being, and it took 3 weeks for me to get through to tell you this. And by the way, he's still explaining what he was explaining in chapter 10, but now he goes into great detail. Now, this is really interesting. I told you last week, Michael, remember, he came and fought for the body of Moses, he said, and he told Satan, the Lord rebuke thee. And so Moses was buried somewhere where only God knows. So, but that's the power of these angels. This is one of the reasons why this is so difficult for me to teach, because this chapter alone is the reason skeptics say that Daniel is not a legitimate book in the Bible. This chapter. And you're going to say, well, but this chapter, I'm reading through it, Townsend, and all I get is historic things, and I don't know if they're true or not. I want you to know, on the basis of every theologian, as most liberal as you can get, all the way to the most conservative you can get, and I'm beyond that, by the way. I'm beyond conservative. I just believe every word as it is, as God gave it to us. Every one of them agrees chapter 11 does say history exactly like it was to the very letter. I told you many weeks ago now that the probabilities of 30 miracles happening exactly like it was spoken of years before the miracles, it would take if 250 earths had 6 billion beings on them, and they were all flipping coins, flipping dimes, none of them could get 30 dimes in a row flipped, according to probabilities. It would take 1 times 10 to the 72 power people, that's more people than you could ever imagine, ever being anywhere, to get 30 dimes to flip straight. At least 30 prophecies right here are talking about what happened in history. Now, it was prophecy to Daniel. It was history after all this came about. And so that's why it's so vital and important. There are really two books in the Old Testament that skeptics always kick against, and I'll tell you why. One is Isaiah, and the other is Daniel. And the reason for both of those is the same reason why two New Testament books are always questioned by the skeptics, even starting with Martin Luther, and that's Hebrews and Revelation. Martin Luther said those two were not inspired of God, and so did all the liberal theologians down through history. In the Old Testament, it was Isaiah and Daniel. What those four have in common? Israel. The prophecies concerning Israel. Somehow in Satan's type of Christianity, his pseudo-Christianity, Satan has to do something to convince everyone that Israel is no more, that there are no more promises to Israel. Daniel refutes that right here in chapter 11. And I'll show you that. I got to get around here, okay? So God's going to give Daniel information that's going to happen to his people Israel. Now, here's the simplistic mind of Townsend when it comes to Israel, okay? Cyrus said to decree, you can go back and you can build the wall and you can build the temple. And I'm thinking, okay, 400 years later, Christ comes. Boy, that's great. The problem is, God said they would be in Babylon for 70 years. But the next 400 years until Christ, they were in the Holy Land. They were in Jerusalem, in that area, in Israel. And there were battles and wars fought nearly every decade in the land of Israel. And that's what chapter 11 is going to talk about, okay? We'll see that as soon as we get through it. I've got a lot of ways to go, and so just help me, Lord, okay? Verse 2 starts to unfold the revelation, okay? Chapter 12 really starts with the tribulation, but we've got to flip over toward the end of chapter 11 that we'll get to next week. And that's when the final king in history actually becomes the final king of the world in the tribulation period. But we'll see all of that next week, okay? So it's a sweep of history. Now, we've seen a sweep of history two other times in the book of Daniel. This gets in great detail because it's all pointed to what's going to happen to Israel in the next 400 years, that they're back in their homeland. It was a miracle for Cyrus to sign the decree for them to go back. It was a greater miracle for God to preserve them for 400 years through all of these battles that we're going to be discussing, okay? Now, a footnote I want you to remember, the details of this prophecy from verse 2 to 35 are so accurate, so remarkable, so verifiable, that this section of Scripture is why the critics go against this book. It's this chapter we're going through now. By the way, this is one of the most boring chapters in the entire Bible. This parallels Leviticus with all the births. He begat this, he begat them, he begat them. You say, what in the world is this all about? I'll tell you what, it means a whole lot. I hope I can present this to you for understanding. I was trying to get through this to try to come out with an outline, try to figure out an outline. There wasn't an outline. It wasn't easy at all. I worked and I worked. Finally, it came to me that there are four A kings, names that start with the name of A, the letter A, that go through this whole thing. So I'm going to quickly go through as much as I can, but I've got to hurry here. So you've got two ears. You listen twice as much as I speak with one mouth. And so I just have this alliterative problem, okay? I really do. That's why my family is Jennifer, Jessica, Jeremy, Jethany, Jebby, and Jenbamin. So that has to work out that way in my brain, okay? There are all kinds of reasons why We know this couldn't have been written at a later date. All kinds of, there's linguistic reasons, there's historical reasons. It was written in Aramaic and in Hebrew at the same time. That couldn't have happened 300 years later, 200 years later, as the critics say. Historical reasons, many, many reasons. Most of all is because they're saying Daniel's a liar. That he didn't really live then, that somebody later on pretended to be Daniel and wrote this as a prophecy back then. Not true. I showed you Ezekiel 3 times. Daniel's mentioned as one of the 3 greatest figures in Israel's history. And Ezekiel was a contemporary with Daniel. They knew each other, okay? So, he's too great of a character for that to be a liar. God can predict the future. By the way, when they're saying that somebody wrote it later and back-wrote everything, because everything's so accurate in history as to what happened in Israel during this intertestamental period between the Old and New Testament, that they said it couldn't have happened, but those are the people that don't believe that God wrote the Bible. God knew what he was doing, okay? Now, let's just head on. Verse 2. And now will I show thee the truth. Here comes the revelation. Behold, there shall stand up 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, shall he stir up all against the realm of Grecia. There's a king, the 4th one that's going against Greece. He said there's going to be 3 kings. Following those 3 kings, there's going to be a 4th. Now, I can tell you the 3 kings, okay? The 3 kings, the first was Cambyses, who was the son of Cyrus, okay? He was a king at that time. The second, history tells us, was Smerdis. He looked like Cambyses and pretended to be Cambyses for a while. I can't go into details, okay? Just know that all these things happened. After Cambyses was Darius Hystaspes. Darius Hystaspes, not the other Darius, okay? Now, the 4th one was Ahasuerus. Now, history knows him as Xerxes the First. I know that. He's mentioned in Ezra chapter 4, verse 6, and also all the way through the book of Esther. And so he was the king that picked Esther to be his wife, the queen, okay? Ahasuerus. He's a historical figure. Now, he's the guy, fellas, young fellas, he's the guy that took 300,000 of his men to Greece, to where the 300 Spartans stood in a gap and held them off, okay? Are you with me now? Those 300 Spartans? Now, the comic book is a comic book. There were actually 1,400 of them that stood in that gap. 300 of them were Spartans, but there were people from Thespia and one that starts with an H. I forget what it is, but another one. And so there were 1,400 of them. Now, where the 300 came in was after Xerxes. By the way, Xerxes sent 10,000 men against them at the very beginning of his 300,000. And so they killed all 10,000 of them, and 3 Spartans died in that battle. I mean, this is such cool history. I just get goosebumps thinking that God knew this and predicted this. Even the Battle of Thermopylae would be fought. And then he sent 10,000 of his best warriors, and they kind of decimated. About a tenth of the force was killed, but then a lot of them got killed. They had to retreat. And then a guy under Leonidas, who was the general of the Spartans, he went and told Ahasuerus, Xerxes, that there was a trail going around behind them through the mountain there to go behind them. And so as they went around, they realized that, and he told the men of Thespia and the men of the city that starts with the H, I can't remember what it is right now, Heliopolis, something like that. He told them, you guys go on so you can fight another day. We'll stay here, and we're going to stay here to the death. Now, that battle caused the Greek Empire to unite and become the Greek Empire later under Alexander the Great. If it wasn't for that battle, 300 of them stood against 300,000, and they crashed in on them and they died. They took Leonidas' body and they did all kinds of torturous things to him. It's one of the most dynamic things in history, but it's biblical. Okay? Ahasuerus did this. By the way, It made Greece mad. So they united as a city-states, and the second person that we're going to have here, 150 years later, the Greeks got their act together and decided to retaliate based on the guy that came 150 years earlier, and his name was Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was in his 20s. That is a pretty good rendition of him, by the way. I've seen the statue of him, and somebody did this off of the statue. He was a brilliant general, young man. And Alexander the Great, 150 years later, again, verse 3, and a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule the great dominion and do according to his will. That mighty king was Alexander the Great. All Bible commentaries agree who this is, by the way, both liberal all the way to conservative. He retaliated to what happened to Greece 150 years earlier. He got the massive army of Greece and went against the Persian Empire. And I'm telling you, as a man who stands out in history, perhaps the most remarkable military leader by the age of 33, he'd conquered the world. His army wouldn't go any further. They were worn out. They'd conquered everything from Europe to India, and he was partying one night in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. And in a drunken stupor, he fell over and died that night. Verse 4, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken. This is after he dies. Watch this. No sooner than he dies. Watch this. And shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven. Now, it took about 80 years to divide this kingdom because they had battles with all the Greek city-states as to who's going to do it. Four generals, four winds of heaven, four generals took over for Alexander the Great. And I can basically tell you their names, but they were divided. Now, the next verse says, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. In other words, it won't go to his children. Now, he had a brother that was mentally retarded, Alexander did. He had an illegitimate son. He had a baby that was born after he died, posthumously. So all of them were killed by these generals that wanted control. All of them. His wife was killed too. And that was a thing they did back then. So when the Bible says his posterity will not rule after him, that's true. Okay? Just check off another box. Here's another prophecy that was right on, okay? That went into four parts. Cassander took Macedonia, Lysimachus took Thrace and Asia Minor. Ptolemy, remember him, Ptolemy, there's a line of Ptolemy kings that ruled Egypt. Okay, the Egyptians actually were Greeks, by the way, at this point in time, and from there on. So they were very, very European-like. That's why the Egyptians look different than other African countries, by the way. But nonetheless, and then remember that, he took Egypt, and Seleucus took Syria. And there's a line of Seleucian kings that were in Syria. Now, Syria is just north of Jerusalem, right? Just north of Israel. It's right there. That was the center and focal point of the Seleucid Empire. Egypt was the center and focal point of the Ptolemy Empire. So when the Bible starts talking about the king of the north, it's the logistics are from Israel's viewpoint, because Syria is just to the north. It talks about the king of the south, it's Egypt is the king of the south. So now we'll get there, okay? We're gonna start getting there. I hope you're with me, okay? Verse 5, and the king of the south, guess what? You just learned something historically. Who would that be? That's the Ptolemies in Egypt, because everything geographically is referenced to Israel. You'll notice in verse 6 in the middle, it says the king of the north. That's Syria. Now, mark that in your mind. You're going to see a lot of verses now, king of the south, king of the north. Doesn't mean one king for over 100 years. Doesn't mean. There are going to be all kinds of kings named Ptolemy and named Seleucus, okay? A lot of kings under this line, okay? There'll be different names with the Ptolemy, and I'll tell you a few of those probably. But the king of the south, that's the Ptolemy dynasty, shall be strong and of his princes. That's the princes of Alexander. And he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion, and in the end of years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. And that's true. The Ptolemy king gave his daughter, her name was Bernice. Back then it would have been Bernice. That's how you pronounce it. But Bernice is now how we pronounce it here in America. There's a woman named Bernice. Oh, well. But you didn't catch that reference, I hope. Who did? Oh, my wife caught that reference. Okay, all right. It's in What's Up, Doc. There's a woman named Bernice. Okay. Where was I? I was in the Bible, wasn't I? Okay. So the Seleucid dynasty built in the north, the Ptolemaic dynasty is built in the south, and they start out, south starts a little more powerful than the north gets powerful. They start warring together. By the way, all the wars are going on around Israel in that place because that's where the armies are meeting. Don't think these people went right back from Cyrus. They built the temple and they built the walls, and they were there in peace for 400 years till Jesus came. They were not. They were still being persecuted during these wars. You'll see them join a war in just in a little while, okay? Now, the angel was right on. Another king that I didn't add here because it would have been lengthy after this was Antiochus Theos. Now, those you Bible students know that Theos means God. He called himself God, okay? He was the third king of Syria, made to make a treaty with Egypt. By the way, Bernice died, and the king of the north's wife killed her, killed their children, and then killed him, poisoned him, by the way. So she was pretty mad. Don't get your wife mad, guys, okay? Don't get him mad, okay? So that's exactly what happened. So Antiochus Theos, and he was the third king of Syria, and the king of Egypt was a man named Ptolemy Philadelphus, and you know Philadelphia, again, back then was a city, and they named everything after these guys. By the way, you know Antioch, right? Antioch was named after Antiochus, which was in the area that Antiochus ruled. So you've got Antioch. That's where Christians started. You ought to know these things for your own sake, for your own history's sake. That's where we were called Christians first, okay? Now, middle of verse 6, he shall not retain the power of his arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm. In other words, the power of both of them, the whole thing fell apart. But she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. In other words, everybody involved is going to go. Exactly what happened, okay? So now this is brought to the throne of the north because the Seleucid king Antiochus Theos dies, okay? So it's brought to a throne by the name of Callinicus. You don't need to know all these names. There won't be a test. Verse 7, but out of a branch of her roots, that is out of the root of Bernice, okay, the murdered wife Bernice, there was a name, Ptolemy Euergetus. It says there in verse 7 that one shall stand up in his estate. Now, the roots of the branch come in, the wife had a brother from the south, and he comes with an army, and he goes against the king of the north, and he defeats him. He becomes the king of the north, okay? Boy, these battles, by the way, they turn into movies, okay? There are older movies that, black and white, that have a lot of this stuff in them, by the way. I remember seeing them. Even the Spartan 300, there's an old black and white movie that tells all about that. But verse 8 says, and he, that's the king of the south, shall continue more years than the king of the north. Yeah, he went 13 more years. Callinicus fell off his horse and died. The one in the south continued for 13 more years. That's how accurate things are here. Now look at verse 10. I got to hustle. We come to another king. The third one is Antiochus the Great. Now, not Antiochus Theos, Antiochus who said he was God. This is his son, okay? But he's an important one. That's why I'm putting him here. He was the king of the north. He gave his daughter to the king of the south to be married. And what was her name, class? Cleopatra. Ooh, I've heard of Cleopatra. Well, she was the daughter of the king of the north, Antiochus the Great. She was given to make peace with him, okay? So, Ahasuerus, Alexander, Antiochus the Great, okay? History, again, doesn't even argue about these. I've read liberal commentators, and they say, yeah, this is true, but somebody wrote it later because it's so accurate. Flip another dime, folks, you get heads again. Just keep flipping a dime, you get heads again. There is no way God's not knowing the future. God knows your future. God knows the past and the future. He is the I am, as Daniel preached about Thursday night. He's the I am. He's the ever-present God that knows the entire past and future. He knows all of your past and future too, by the way. Okay? Now remember, Ptolemy of the South is the point of verse 10, has conquered. So he's ruling Israel now. They go back and forth. Israel's in this conundrum of having to obey which way wins. There are some that are friendly, most are not. But everybody wants taxes. You'll see that in just a little bit. Verse 10, but his sons, plural, shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through, and then he return and be stirred up even unto his fortress. One of Callinicus' sons died. The other one became the king of the north. That's Antiochus the Great. That's who birthed Cleopatra, okay? And he said he'd come with a multitude of forces. History tells us that 75,000 soldiers came to attack Egypt and just stomped right through the land of Israel. Everything was desolate then. The Jews had to hide in the walls of Jerusalem. They couldn't go out. Verse 11 says, and the king of the south shall be moved with choler. Now what's that? That's anger. He made him mad. Okay? Somebody arrives at your border with 75,000 soldiers, you'd be mad too. And shall come forth and fight with him, that's the king of the north, and he shall set forth a great multitude. So a great multitude begins a fight. Now the king of the south is Ptolemy, named Philometor. And he and 73,000 men, history tells us 5,000 cavalry, 73 elephants, and the rest were footmen. Okay? They used elephants as battering rams. And they met and so forth. So verse 12, and when he hath taken away, that's the he's are so difficult, he's and him's so difficult to know who's who, okay? And I battled over this myself. When he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many tens of thousands, and he shall not be strengthened by it. This is a great historic battle, by the way. History says that it caused, in the north, Antiochus the Great to lose 10,000 footmen, 300 cavalry, and 5 of their elephants. That's according to the historian Polybius, who wrote about this battle. It goes on, verse 13, and the king of the north shall return and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former multitude, and he certainly shall come after certain years. Again, it was 4 years later he came. Verse 14, and in those times there shall be many stand up against the king of the south. He had a great army, by the way. People were joining it along with the way. But notice in verse 14, also the robbers of thy people. Now here's where we mix Israel in with this mess, with these wars. That's why this is so important, because there are some Israelites that are known as robbers. Who's thy people? Daniel's people is Israel. The robbers of thy people, that's the Jews. Who are the robbers? Well, the Hebrew term means the sons of breaking, or the sons of breaking the covenant. They broke the covenant of God by becoming warriors with they were mercenaries that joined the king of the north. These guys, history tells us, thought if they fought with them, when Antiochus the Great wins, he'll favor them. Now, he did give them money, and he gave them praise, but that was all. They thought he would free their country. They actually went to try to free their country. In the New Testament, you've got one of the disciples was progeny of these men, these fighters. But, okay, so I won't, there's just so much going through my mind now, okay? Also the robbers of thy people. So they joined them. They joined the north then. Daniel's people, the Jews, the robbers of them. Those who don't keep the promise, they're covenant breakers, they're rebels. Could be translated men of violence who break the law. Frankly, they're strong-willed apostate Jews that are revolutionaries, okay? Really, most historians think they wanted Judean independence. and they didn't get it. Verse 15, so the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount. That's a siege. He sieges around Egypt. Goes on, describes how the battle takes place. You don't want to know all that. Just remember that the north literally routed the south and destroyed them. Verse 16, this is a key. And he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. That's the king of the north, Antiochus the Great. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which is by the hand, which by his hand shall be consumed. What's the glorious land, class? That's Israel. It's the promised land. That's the Holy Land, land flowing with milk and honey. When this battle was over, Antiochus the Great, he gave a little bit of money to these Jewish rebels, but he thought to himself, if these Jewish rebels, they only fought for me because they wanted their independence, I'm going to bring the hammer down on them. So he tried to hurt all of them as a result. Look at verse 17. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him, and he shall give him the daughter of women. That's the Cleopatra. He gives the king of the south his wife, and she's supposed to be a spy for him. Now notice this. It goes on in verse 17. She shall not stand on his side, neither before him. That was true in history because Cleopatra hated her dad. He sent her to be a spy in the Ptolemy dominion, and she turned on her dad and told the Ptolemy everything that he needed to know to defeat her dad. Okay. Why does the Bible put this in here? Just to tell us that God absolutely knows history even before it happens. Don't for a minute you can think anything can happen in history without God knowing that it happened, without God being in control. He determines all the boundaries of the nations. History, as someone said, is his story. Verse 18, and after this shall he turn his face into the isles. That's the coastlands. Antiochus the Great conquered that part of the world, conquered Egypt, so he started going to the coasts. And guess what happened? That's Mediterranean now. That includes Greece. But look at the next verse. A prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach shall he cause it to turn upon him. Rome just now came to power. It no longer was Greece. Rome came to power, and they said, well, what's this guy doing? What's he doing coming against these countries that are under us? Greece was under Rome at that time. It made Rome mad. Now again, we're going over a 400-year span, folks. This is everything that happened between Cyrus signing the decree and the coming of Jesus Christ. All these wars, all these battles taking place, and a lot of them in Israel, and Israel is joining them too. Verse 19, by the way, this prince that came in 190 BC were the Romans, and they routed the army of Antiochus the Great. And so that's why verse 19 is there. He shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. What he did after Rome defeated him, he kind of went crazy. He went to his own homeland, and there was one night when he ordered some of his close men to ransack and plunder his temple of all the gold and all the treasures of his temple. And the people of the city, of his city, got so mad that he was trying to steal everything from there, and they'd be left with nothing, that they murdered him on the spot. Antiochus wasn't so great after all. Followed by another ruler, verse 20. This is interesting. The guy stood up, his estate was a raiser of taxes. Isn't that interesting? Because Rome was now in power, and they started raising taxes. The taxes they had were from Syria was taxes to pay Rome, and they were required to pay 1,000 talents periodically to the Roman power. Now, doesn't this all mix in with the New Testament when they sent all the world to be taxed, and it caused Jesus and Mary and Joseph to end up in Bethlehem? God knows what he's doing through history, folks. He even has a king arise in Rome that starts taxing these kings of the north and south. It goes on. So Ahasuerus, Alexander, Antiochus the Great. Fourthly, Sorry, I messed up there. We have a new king of the South, by the way. Go ahead, take the picture there. That's good. You know, they'll be number 2 this week. You know that because they beat Michigan State last week. Yes. Yesterday beat Michigan State 38-13, but they'll be number 2 because Miami lost. You know who's only ahead of them now, right? Okay, let's go. Okay, Antiochus Epiphanes. I got to get this in. Hold on. Okay, I got 3 minutes to get the rest of to get 40 more pages done. I got 3 minutes here. Okay, let's do it. Okay, Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, I put the dates of these so you know that it happened over a long period of time. Kings after kings, kings after kings, battles after battles. Never a time where there was peace in Israel. Even after they built the wall, even after they built the temple. Okay, look at verse 21. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person. How'd you like that to be your introduction in Scripture? Antiochus Epiphanes, referred to here. He had no right to reign, by the way. He didn't have any legitimate claim to the throne. He had absolutely no right at all. But nonetheless, verse 22. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overthrown from before him and shall be broken. And that's the south. He devastated the Egyptians, okay? Verse 23, and after a league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, and he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. He tried to adopt a friendship type of thing. He would be friendly to some cities until he got them, and then he would come down ruthlessly under them, okay? Verse 24, he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds. Verse 25, another war with Egypt. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great arm, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, and he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Another war. This is Pelusium, who's now king of the Ptolemy Empire. Because his own counselors did it. Look at verse 36. Yea, they that feed on the portion of his food shall destroy him. His own troops, his own soldiers killed him. They said, we're not going to go through another battle. We're going to surrender. Verse 27, and both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief. They were evil. Goes on and says, they speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet at the end shall be the appointed time. What time? A time is coming. Then shall he return to the land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant. Note that, underline that. When Antiochus Epiphanes came back to Jerusalem, he purposed to be against the holy covenant, and shall do exploits and return to his own land. He's right back in Israel. By the way, this does not go beautifully in history. He goes into the city of Jerusalem and he kills all the children, all the babies, all the children. The next group of troops he sends through, he kills all the women. He takes the women's bodies and he throws them all over the wall of Jerusalem, so that any army that comes by will see all these women scattered around the walls of Jerusalem. I mean, he is a vile fellow. And then not only that, look at verse 30. Watch this. He has indignation against the holy covenant, so shall he do, and shall even return and has intelligence. He has special meetings as to what to do with them that forsake the holy covenant. They forsook it. Look at verse 31. And the army and arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, that's the temple, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. What was that? Well, first he put a statue of Zeus, their god, little g, on the Temple Mount. Secondly, they had a pig offered on the burnt offering as a sacrifice, and he made the priests eat the pig. This is a vile fellow. Look at verse 32. But the people who do know their God shall be strong and do right and do exploits. And now you're going to get into the Maccabees. I don't have time to do that because we're out of time. But just notice that these guys that wanted to do right, they started what was known as, let me get this. I gotta find it. He desecrated the temple, okay? And so the group of the Jews known as the Hasidians. You know what a Hasidic Jew is? That's one that was under the Maccabees that defeated this guy and set the temple back upright, okay? And built the temple of Herod for the New Testament time. So all of these things, the Hasidic Jews did this, by the way. Okay, I got to read verse 35, so I'll be done. And some of them, understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white. You know why God did all this? You know why he did the 400 years after they went back and built the temple from Cyrus? It was to try them and to purge them and to make them white, to clear them of their sins. He did his very best to clean up Israel before he sent his son to Israel. That's why in the New Testament you've got Paul and his crowd of believers. You've got I'm not talking about Saul, and you've got the different kinds of Jews that were on the council. They were all pretty good fellas, but they weren't good enough. Jesus came to make them whiter than snow. Lord, thank you for this. This is a tremendous history lesson. I know most people here don't like history, but still, I hope they can see how you mixed in all these things for your chosen people, the Jews, to cleanse them before Christ even came so they would at least be acceptable to him in the beginning before they rejected him. They have no reason to reject Christ, but they did anyway. Thank you for bringing the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all these into the New Testament from this time and from cleaning up all the wars that happened before. Lord, bless the rest of the day, we pray in Christ's name, amen.